The strength of loneliness is the ability to be both your enemy and your friend at once. Niccolo Machiavelli. If I were alive today, I wouldn't ask who rules your world. I'd ask, who has conquered your silence? And the answer would be simple: loneliness. Not your presidents, not your algorithms, but that quiet, unspoken ache inside you when the screen goes dark and there's no one to mirror your existence back to you. You scroll, you like, you comment, but deep down, you know it's all noise. Noise trying to drown out a silence you no longer know how to befriend. In my time, the powerful sought solitude. They stepped away from the crowd, not out of fear, but out of necessity, because only in silence could they hear their own mind. In silence, they met themselves. Now, you run from yourself with every scroll, every like, every false connection. You're surrounded, yet completely alone. Loneliness used to be a furnace. It forged visionaries, thinkers, artists. Now, it's a swamp. It drags you into addiction, anxiety, numbness. You no longer sit with yourself. You sedate. Your ancestors feared war, famine, death. You fear silence. You fear a room with no sound but your own thoughts. That's where we are now. I watch your age from the shadow, and I see it. Loneliness is no longer strength. It's become your master. A quiet, invisible tyrant that dictates your decisions, your addictions, your search for validation. You were taught to avoid being alone, as if being with yourself is dangerous, as if only through others you exist. But tell me, what kind of existence depends on constant noise to stay alive? If these words hit something in you, subscribe to this channel. Let the truth spread to those who are tired of pretending they're fine. Join the Telegram. There, the masks fall even deeper. There, we speak what no one dares to admit out loud. This world doesn't need more opinions. It needs honesty. Brutal, clear, surgical honesty. And I won't lie to you, loneliness will break you first, before it makes you. But if you're still here, still listening, you already know something inside you is done running. In the past, loneliness was sacred. It was not seen as a flaw or failure. It was chosen, deliberate, essential. The minds that shaped empires, wrote philosophies, discovered hidden patterns of power, they all withdrew, not because they couldn't belong, but because they knew that true clarity demands separation. You cannot see the world clearly when you're tangled in its noise. Back then, solitude was a strategy, not a sentence. And in solitude, men became dangerous, not to others, but to their illusions. The greatest shifts in history did not happen in crowds. They began in isolation, in dark rooms, in the tension between one mind and its truth. Power was born in that stillness. Pain was transmuted there. What you now call loneliness, we called preparation. We called it alignment. It wasn't comfortable, it was necessary. Because only the one who walks alone can see what the herd is blind to. You confuse noise for connection, but noise is easy. Noise is addictive. Noise keeps you from meeting yourself. You've been trained to fill every second. Music, podcasts, timelines, calls, but none of that brings you closer to anyone. It only keeps you further from your own reflection. In my time, a man who feared being alone was seen as weak. Not because solitude is pleasant, but because it's revealing, and most people cannot survive the truth they carry. There's a reason prophets, mystics, rulers all walked into silence before they changed the world. Because silence tells the truth, and it doesn't care about your comfort. You now live in a world that treats silence as failure. If you're alone, something must be wrong. If you're quiet, you must be broken. But ask yourself, when did stillness become something to be cured? Solitude used to sharpen the mind like a blade. It demanded clarity. It required you to face your flaws without distraction. You emerged not more popular, but more powerful. Not more liked, but more free. Now, you're surrounded by dopamine, but starved of meaning. You talk more than ever, but understand less. You show everything and reveal nothing. This didn't happen overnight, it was engineered. Because a society addicted to connection is easy to control. People who can't sit with themselves will consume anything to fill the gap. And people who fear silence will accept any noise that promises relief. But real relief never comes from escape. It comes from confrontation, from stillness, from silence that bruises before it heals. You still have the choice. Loneliness isn't your enemy. Your addiction to avoiding it is. Your fear of being unseen, unheard, untouched, it's not weakness. It's the residue of a world that sold you distraction instead of depth. You are made to walk alone at times. That's how you remember who you are beneath all your masks. Today, loneliness has mutated. It no longer resembles the silence of the wise. It looks more like quiet suffocation. It's not sacred, it's pathological. You don't choose to be alone anymore. You end up alone, despite doing everything you were told would bring connection. You've been promised closeness through apps, messages, instant responses, but somehow it's never enough. You feel more visible than ever, and yet more unknown than at any time in history. The world gave you access to everyone and connection to no one. That is the paradox of your age. You've been taught that constant engagement equals relevance, that being seen means being valued, that the more people watch you, the more you exist. But that's a lie. What you've built isn't intimacy, it's exposure, it's performance, and the more you perform, the further you drift from what's real inside you. This isn't loneliness from the outside, it's internal disconnection, a fracture between the person you show and the person you silence. Your loneliness is not just the absence of others, it's the presence of unprocessed pain. It's the echo of all the versions of yourself you were never allowed to express. So you medicate, not with pills, with distraction. You binge, you scroll, you fill every gap with noise. You simulate life through the highlight reels of others. But when the phone turns off, the ache returns. That subtle panic, that breathlessness, that terrifying moment where you are left with only yourself and realize you don't know who that even is. In past eras, loneliness sharpened men. Now, it dissolves them, because solitude without meaning becomes decay. You haven't been given the tools to turn inward, only the incentives to avoid it. You were told that more connection would solve your emptiness, but more noise only deepens it. You crave authenticity, but surround yourself with simulations. You crave depth, but fear silence. And you're not alone in this. It's happening to millions, quietly, invisibly, desperately. The market profits from your loneliness. Entire industries exist to offer you fake closeness, dopamine relief, illusionary belonging. And they never satisfy, because they're not meant to. They're meant to keep you coming back. Loneliness has become a business model, and the more you avoid being with yourself, the easier it is to control you. A person who can't sit in silence will do anything to escape it. Buy, watch, consume, obey. You are not broken for feeling empty. You are not defective because crowds don't fill you. You are simply never shown how to turn that silence into strength. Your loneliness isn't the problem. It's your relationship to it that needs to be rewritten. And that begins the moment you stop expecting the world to complete you. The difference between the loneliness of the past and the loneliness of now is not the feeling, it's the framework. Back then, solitude was held by meaning. A man could sit with himself for hours, not because he enjoyed the pain, but because he trusted its purpose. Silence wasn't emptiness, it was preparation. Today, you sit with the same silence, but it feels like decay, like failure, like something to escape, because you were never taught what to do with it. You were taught that silence is a threat, not a mirror. In the past, people had structure around their solitude, rituals, reflection, faith, philosophy. They stepped away from the noise to realign. Today, you step into silence only when everything else has failed. It's not a sacred choice, it's a last resort. And by then, you're already drowning in your own avoidance. That's why it hurts so much. Not because solitude is inherently painful, but because you've loaded it with every unprocessed fear and unresolved wound you carry. Back then, being alone was an act of discipline. Now, it's treated like punishment. You crave constant reassurance that you matter, that you're seen, that you're not forgotten. And so your days become a performance to avoid the terror of feeling invisible. You don't just fear being alone. You fear that without the audience, you disappear. But here's the truth. If your sense of self only exists in the eyes of others, then you don't have a self. You have a mask. When solitude becomes something accidental, not intentional, it loses its power. In the past, men chose it to become stronger. Now, people fall into it and collapse because you weren't given the tools to anchor yourself. You were told to chase connection, but never shown how to build connection with your own mind. You learned to seek validation, but never developed internal clarity. So when the noise stops, you spiral because there's nothing inside strong enough to hold you. But here's what they didn't tell you. Solitude is still power. It always was. The silence you fear is still the same space where insight is born, where identity reforms, where clarity begins. You just stopped entering it with purpose. You began stumbling into it by accident, after breakups, failures, burnout. And in that panic, you missed the opportunity it always held. You never learned to harness the tension, you just ran. The past and the present are not divided by experience. They are divided by interpretation. A man alone in a dark room 500 years ago faced the same silence you face today. The difference is that he wasn't trying to escape it. He was listening. And that one shift, from resistance to awareness, is what changed him. You can still make that shift, but only if you stop asking the world to fix what only presence can heal. Loneliness is not a single thing. It wears many masks. Sometimes it looks like boredom. Other times, it's that cold ache in your chest when surrounded by people who don't really see you. At its core, loneliness isn't about being physically alone. It's about feeling emotionally unseen, unheld, unrecognized. You can sleep beside someone every night and still feel utterly abandoned. Because loneliness is not the absence of bodies. It's the absence of resonance, of real, raw connection with others, but more dangerously, with yourself. You weren't taught to explore that disconnection. You were taught to label it, fix it, numb it, reframe it. But what if that ache isn't something to fix, but something to follow? What if it's pointing to a fracture inside you that's been ignored for years? The child in you that felt unloved, the teenager in you that adapted to survive, the adult in you who's still performing, still pleasing, still pretending. That is the true root of modern loneliness. Self-abandonment. Not in theory, but in small, daily betrayals of your own truth. When you say yes to what you hate, when you silence your discomfort to maintain peace, when you pretend to be fine while dying inside, you are creating the soil where loneliness grows. And you feel it not because you're weak, but because a part of you is screaming to be heard. That scream doesn't need more motivation or affirmation. It needs acknowledgement. It needs space. And you will never find peace until you give it room to exist. Much of your loneliness is inherited from families who never modeled emotional intimacy, from cultures that rewarded strength over sensitivity, from systems that punished stillness and worshipped productivity. You were told to be independent, but no one showed you what healthy interdependence feels like. You were told to love yourself, but never taught how to actually be with yourself. So now, when you're alone, you don't feel safe, you feel exposed. Loneliness is not failure, it is feedback. It's the nervous system telling you something is missing. Sometimes it's connection, sometimes it's meaning, but most of the time, it's you, not the persona, not the curated version. The raw, flawed, unfiltered you. And here's the brutal truth. Until you stop abandoning yourself, no amount of love from others will fill the void, because they can only meet the version of you that you bring to the surface. If you've buried the real one, they'll always love the mask, and you'll always feel alone. There's only one way out, through the discomfort, through the silence, through the parts of yourself you've disowned. You don't need to be fixed, you need to be felt. And the more deeply you feel your own presence, the less terrifying your solitude becomes. Because at that point, you're no longer alone. You're finally with someone, yourself. Loneliness can destroy you, but it can also rebuild you. It all depends on whether you resist it or use it. The difference is not in the feeling itself, but in how you respond to it. Most people collapse into loneliness. They see it as a sign they're failing, that something is wrong with them. But those who learn to use it, they become different, sharper, deeper, unshakable. Because when you learn to stand in your own presence without shrinking, you stop begging for the presence of others. That changes everything. Loneliness, when embraced consciously, becomes a lens. It shows you who you are when no one's watching. That's your rawest self, your honest reactions, your default emotions, your deepest fears. From that space, you gain insight most people never reach. You start to see what you actually want versus what you've been conditioned to chase. You become dangerous, not to others, but to the systems that depend on your confusion. In social settings, solitude gives you leverage. You stop entering conversations needing to be liked. That makes your words cleaner, your presence calmer. You're no longer performing. People feel that. They respect it. You don't chase attention. Attention comes to you. Because in a world addicted to noise, someone who is rooted in silence is magnetic. You stop over-explaining, stop oversharing, stop shrinking to fit the moment. You hold your ground, not with aggression, but with anchored presence. Loneliness also clarifies your relationships. When you're terrified of being alone, you'll tolerate anything: manipulation, disrespect, emotional scraps. But when you're grounded in your own presence, you walk away easily. Not out of pride, out of clarity. You no longer mistake connection for survival. You choose people from alignment, not from fear. That's how loneliness becomes power. It teaches you to stop settling. It trains your nervous system to trust that your aliveness does not depend on another person. You can use loneliness in business too. When you're not afraid to stand alone, you can make decisions without pandering. You can walk paths others won't. You can say what others won't. You don't need the market's constant approval. You lead from depth, not from desperation. The most creative, bold, and visionary moves are made by those who've learned to extract insight from their own silence. Not crowdsourced opinions, not endless feedback, just silence, clarity, execution. Even in dating, loneliness is your edge. When you're whole without a partner, you stop leaking need. You flirt without attachment. You connect without performing. You attract those who are also whole, not those looking to fill a void. You don't chase intensity. You wait for resonance. You don't tolerate confusion. You value honesty. This is what happens when loneliness is no longer your fear, but your teacher. But for all its power, loneliness can still be a trap if you use it to avoid intimacy, to justify isolation, to hide from connection. It becomes weakness again. It becomes a shell. Strength is not in detachment, it's in discernment. Learn to choose solitude when it brings clarity, and learn to re-enter connection when it's safe, true, and mutual. That's balance. That's maturity. That's emotional intelligence. So how do you apply this today? Start by scheduling solitude like you would a meeting. Make it non-negotiable. Turn off all devices. Sit with yourself and ask, where am I abandoning myself? Where am I faking connection just to feel less alone? What would it look like to be radically honest today? Then act on one small truth. Speak it, write it, live it. One honest moment at a time, and you start becoming someone who can't be shaken by silence ever again. Practice observing people without needing their approval. Go to a social space, cafe, park, event, and just observe. Don't reach, don't perform, just be. You'll feel discomfort at first, then you'll feel power, because you're no longer the one chasing connection. You're holding it inside yourself. Next, cleanse your digital environment. Unfollow content that simulates connection but feeds comparison. Create more than you consume. Post with intention or don't post at all. Curate silence into your online life. Make your feeds match your nervous system, not your anxiety. And most importantly, forgive yourself for the years you spent escaping your own company, for the people you tolerated out of fear, for the moments you begged to be seen while hiding your truth. You didn't know better. Now you do. If you understand what I'm saying, subscribe to this channel. Let this message reach those who are still running, still pretending, still breaking in silence. In the Telegram, we go even deeper. There, we're building a community of people who are done with the noise and ready for truth. If you recognized yourself in these words, write in the comments, "My darkness is my strength." Let's see how many are ready to stop apologizing for their truth. Let's see who's ready to stop running. Because this is not the end. This is only the beginning. And the ones who stay will change everything.